Good afternoon, sons and daughters of God. It gives me great joy to be with you today and to give to you my lecture on the psychology of Zalem, a study of reincarnation and karma. I invite you to stand for our invocation. In the name of the light of God that never fails, beloved Alpha and Omega, in the heart of God, in the great central sun, and in our own heart here below. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Divine Mother, I call for the realignment of our souls with Thee, O Thou Father, Mother. I call forth beloved Saint Germain and Portia, beloved El Morya, Kuthumi, and Dwal Kul, beloved Mother Mary, and beloved Kuan Yin. O God, Thou hast been with us from the beginning. Seven mighty Elohim, Thou hast created us out of the ovoid, of the one light, the one source, the I am that I am. Be with us in this hour, O God, by the piercing light of the three wise men. May we come to know and to understand the divine resolution, as above so below, within our hearts and souls and minds. In the name I am that I am, Sanat Kumara, Gautama Buddha, Lord Maitreya, Jesus Christ, through the heart of beloved Padmasambhava, I invoke the mighty I Am Presence to enter and take dominion in our superconscious mind, the etheric body. Beloved Holy Christ Self, enter and take dominion now in our conscious mind, our mental body. Beloved Holy Christ Self, enter and take dominion in our desire body, our astral body, the subconscious mind. Beloved Mighty I Am Presence, enter and take dominion of our unconscious mind. Occupy till we come to know Thee in the fullness of Thy glory, till we accept Thee, O God, till we enter the path of the Ruby Ray Masters and embrace this point of sacrifice, of surrender, of selflessness, and of service. O Thou Ruby Ray Masters, come to us in this hour, and may we know and understand through this one soul and the story of his life, an understanding of our own journey, these 12,000 years and more since the last days of Atlantis. We call to our great causal body of light and our superconscious mind to focus us now at the point of the coming of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, when He did bring the mighty law that became a way of life. As prophet and as emperor of ancient Atlantis, we receive You, Lord Jesus Christ. We call You to come into our midst, and from that point of our highest union in the most recent last great golden age, we ask You to bring us forward to this hour, and through following the footsteps of this soul, we might come also to the resolution of our psychology through our path of reincarnation and karma. In the name Jesus Christ, therefore we commend our souls unto Thy Spirit, O God. In the name of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, by the heart of Padmasambhava, Vairoshana, Akshobhya, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, Amoga Siddhi, Vajrasattva, we nestle now in the heart of beloved Avalokitesvara Kuan Yin and Mother Mary, for in the immaculate heart and the merciful heart of the Divine Mother we trust. I would like to invite you to sing to our beloved El Morya, who has given to us these most profound teachings and understanding of our path of psychology, along with Kuthumi and Dwal Kul. They are the 3 wise men, and as they make their journey to fulfill the epiphany, the visitation of the Christ child, they stopped by to deliver to us this message today, that we might have it for our own soul's journey and understanding of the resolution of karma. Number 188. Please make your calls to El Morya to enlighten you through this lecture. Thank you. Please be seated. To give you the background on A Dweller on Two Planets, it was dictated by Philos the Tibetan to his amanuensis, Frederick S. Oliver. The word amanuensis means secretary. The book was begun in 1883 or 4 when Frederick Oliver was 17 or 18 years old. It was completed in 1886 and published in 1899. The subject is the story of Philos' life in his embodiment as Zalem Numinous on the ancient continent of Atlantis, the greatest nation on earth at that time. The book also covers Philos' embodiment in the 19th century as an American by the name of Walter Pearson. It shows how he reaped the karma he had made 12,000 years before on Atlantis. I am specifically teaching the book A Dweller on Two Planets by Philos because it gives to us an understanding of karma as well as grace. The grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, which gives us the opportunity to live and serve again to balance karma. In the Old Testament, we had a dispensation of the law, and very few individuals in that period of history retained the fusion to the Holy Christ self. Therefore, they did not have the mediator, and Jesus Christ had not come as the Son of God to fulfill the promise of God to draw all men back to him through that Son. So the Old Testament under the law of Moses gives us the example of the harshness of the law descending. Moses himself would act as mediator before the people. And when God said he would punish them and he would bring great calamities to come upon them, Moses would reason with him and urge him to mitigate his wrath against his people. So sometimes Moses was successful and sometimes he was not. With the coming of Jesus Christ, the mediator is an embodiment through Jesus. He came for the specific purpose to reignite the threefold flame and to make of us sons of God, to whoever would believe on his name and receive him. We have that same opportunity today. In the last 2,000 years, because of the dispensation of Jesus Christ, there has been a tremendous opportunity for souls to reestablish their fusion with the Holy Christ self through Jesus and ultimately with Jesus. The reigniting of the threefold flame is a part of that process for those who have lost that flame. The pendulum of Orthodox Christianity has swung to a far position of saying that only grace is necessary. And the Lutheran position is that Jesus did it all on the cross. In the few hours he was on that cross, he atoned for all the sins of the world, past, present, and future. Therefore, all that anyone has to do is to call upon the name of Jesus Christ, accept him as Savior, and they will go to heaven. Now, there is no conditioning in the mind of Martin Luther or Lutherans today. So sins that are done thereafter may be forgiven and are not consequential in this salvation exclusively by grace. Other Christians believe that grace is a part of it, that faith is necessary, of course, as Lutherans do, but they also say that faith without works is dead. And that statement by the Apostle James was rejected by Martin Luther. So what we find is that no matter what the gradations of belief, the basic Orthodox Christian tenet today is that you do not have to balance your karma because Jesus paid the price. My feeling about the book of Philos is that it makes quite clear that grace is present and that we are bound to follow the teachings of the Old and New Testament and to know that grace and to know that union with God through the heart of Jesus Christ, but that does not exempt us from our karma. Our karma must be paid. And what this book shows is that most often, as we find also in Hindu teachings, the cycles of returning karma do not return in the same life as that karma is made. This often explains to us why so much injustice goes uncorrected and the evildoer may continue in his evil ways for a lifetime and to all appearances will not be stopped in any measure. This is a puzzlement to us, except when we understand the law of reincarnation along with karma. Reincarnation says that these cycles come full circle in their time as the fruit that ripens on the tree. And when that karma is ripe, then we are there to reap it. And therefore we never know from day to day why we are reaping calamities or situations. We don't seem to necessarily connect them with any recent right or wrong that we may have done. This is because of the wide orb of the cycles returning. This text then gives us an eye view of ancient Atlantis, where all of us were embodied. We were there. Many of you were there in the golden ages. Many of you were there in the decline. Many of you were there in the hour of the cataclysm of the sinking of Atlantis, which, as you know, happened in stages, beginning about 12,000 years ago to 11,500. So we are all dealing with those records today, and we are dealing with now a final embodiment such as that which was had by Walter Pearson. And we can understand in the light of what we must fulfill in this final embodiment what kind of karma we may have had not only on Atlantis, but in the interim. This book becomes a fundamental text for every Chela on the path, but it is heightened in its meaning by the teachings of the Ascended Masters, which are added to it, almost as an update. In a decade, it will be 100 years since this book was written. Many new teachings have come to light, many new dispensations. What I would like to tell you about our belief in karma is that we do not believe that every last jot and tittle of every act and deed that we have ever committed against life must necessarily be balanced before we experience the resurrection and the ascension. First of all, we have the more recent dispensation, which has come since this book was written, regarding the fact that the Lords of Karma and the 4 and 20 Elders have stated that we may make our ascension having balanced 51% of our karma. Now, in addition to that, we should understand that God does not deal our karma to us as punishment. Karma is a manifestation of an impersonal law as well as a personal law. There is the law of justice, and there is the law of mercy. There is the law of divine intercession, and also the Guru-Chela relationship, where the Guru may take on for a time a certain portion of a Chela's karma, or for extraordinary and exemplary service may balance it entirely. The purpose for us to bear our karma is because karma is our teacher. We must learn the lessons of how and why we misused the energy of life. Next, we receive our karma because we are, in the final analysis, responsible for all of our actions, our words, and our deeds, for the causes we have set in motion. If, therefore, we have a certain karma that is grievous to be borne, that may require several lifetimes to balance, and if we embody and live a life of service combined with a violet flame, giving much mantras and decrees, and totally committing ourselves to the service of life and giving all that we are, God may take this exemplary sign of our daily deeds and shorten the days of our travail. And God has said He would do this for the sake of the elect, to shorten our days, so that He will receive a certain set of deeds, a certain series of long suffering under a certain burden, with virtue and great holiness accompanying it, and say, you have borne enough, you have satisfied the law, and by the grace of Jesus Christ you may come up higher, because you have proven that you will not make this mistake again. So in that sense of the word, the 100% of karma may not be the full 100% of every last situation that we have ever been under. So that is a Hindu concept, and it is largely true. But there is grace, and there is intercession, there is mercy, as well as justice. So with that perspective, I would like to say that this book and our teachings added to it is not only for Chelas, but absolutely foundational to those who would be ministering servants and to have the title of lay minister or of an ordained minister in our organization. This is a calling to which you should aspire. It is a calling to which all are capable, sooner or later. This lecture today is based on the psychology of Zalem, according to what we can know about him from his own words and his own testimony. For Zalem is Philos. So Philos is writing about himself, and he is giving the records. So he gives us enough clues to enter into quite a deep psychological study of himself. And what I would like to say about the situation of analyzing someone's psychology, starting with yourself, is that psychology is intricately woven with karma. What we see in our psychology, which we can trace to our roots in this life, is also traceable to previous lifetimes. Fortunately, Zalem has told us about previous lifetimes before the embodiment on Atlantis, which is the subject of this book. And fortunately, he has told us about his final embodiment in the last century. So we have many keys to how his karma is interwoven with his psychology. One begets the other. And it is truly a circle that determines how, why, where, and as who we reincarnate. In my estimation, then, A Dweller on Two Planets is one of the finest texts on karma. Philos then makes abundantly clear that we have accountability for karma. He also shows how grace is the intercessory light of the Christ. It does not absolve us from the responsibility and the accountability of our karma. Karma is our teacher, and causes we have set in motion, both plus and minus, are our accountability. He shows us the inexorable nature of karma, the exactness of it, and how it does pursue us until we resolve it. But then so does our psychology pursue us until we resolve it. So we almost see them as twins, psychology and karma. Let us speak for a moment of the April 23rd syndrome. It is the dark cycle of mankind's returning karma. And as we chart it on the cosmic clock, from April 23rd, 1990 to April 22nd, 1991, this karma returns to us under the hierarchy of Libra, through the heart chakra. It represents the piercing of the heart, the crucifixion of the heart, as well as the karma of hardness of heart. All levels of initiation are ours in this cycle. Libra then is the cardinal sign of the fourth quadrant of our clock. And the first quadrant is the etheric, the second the mental, the third the desire, and the fourth quadrant is the physical. So karma is exceedingly physical, beginning in this year and continuing through 91, 92, 93. And then in Capricorn we also have a physical cycle because it is a physical earth sign. Apart from that, we are receiving the final karma of 25,800 years, and all of that comes in the physical octave. This karma is being delivered at the signal of the four cosmic beings, Sanat Kumara, Gautama Buddha, Lord Maitreya, Jesus Christ, who are called the four beasts in the book of Revelation. They represent the four quadrants, and they signal to these four horsemen when they shall go forth, when they shall deliver their karma, and when they shall idle and then deliver it again. And they are the Ruby Ray Masters who are directing the return of karma through these messengers who are the four horsemen. I have explained this charting of the dark cycle in Prophecies for the 1990s 3, which is on our 1990 Pearls of Wisdom. What we must realize as we make a study of psychology and karma today is that as of April 23rd, 1990, every single person on planet Earth, not one of us excepted, has received an increment of karma. Not only an increment of karma that is heavier than we have borne in thousands of years, but specifically Atlantean karma, and specifically that karma which Jesus has borne for us. Jesus has borne our karma for us for 2,000 years and is now giving it back to everyone upon earth, because it's the age when we should be in the maturity as sons and daughters of God of our Christhood. And it is the age when we then have a sudden jolt and we come to the realization that we are no longer being carried. As we approach a study then of our psychology and our karma, I believe that we as keepers of the flame, as well as everyone upon earth, has to deal squarely with what I call the April 23rd syndrome. It is anger against God the Father and the Son, which says, "You have borne this karma for me all these thousands of years, and now you expect me to carry it. I don't want to carry it. I will not carry it. and there is a deep sense of anger, resentment, and rebellion that wells up and says, I don't have to go through this misery, this suffering, this burden of carrying this weight. Now, those of you who are on this path have already decided that you are responsible and that you are willing to pay the price for balancing your karma, or you would not be here today. But nevertheless, I tell you that at subconscious and unconscious levels, every one of us has to work with a dweller on the threshold who has had a heyday during the period of Jesus carrying that karma. Now the soul must bear it, and now there is a great weight. We need to deal with that in ourselves, and we have to come to terms with unconscious, unseen, unfelt anger that the individual may have against God. Upon arising this morning, my first counseling session was with someone who was telling me a story about himself, and in whom I perceived there was deep-seated and profound anger against God. And I can tell you that as an archetypal, unconscious force, the anger against Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Divine Mother is seldom absent from anyone to a lesser or greater degree. People get angry at God for their karma, for their lot in life, for God not doing this for them, not doing that for them, not doing the next thing for them. This produces on the surface perhaps a melancholy, a passivity, a dishonesty with oneself, an irritability, an immobilization of one's forces, where one cannot get on with life, one cannot charge, one cannot get going because of unresolved problems with God the Father and God the Mother. The Father, Mother, and the key are the key, and out of the Father and Mother proceed the Son, the living Christ, and the fusion of the Father, Mother in us is the Holy Spirit. So that's 4 parts of God on the 4 quadrants of the cosmic clock as they are charted. Today, then, we need to take a long, hard look at whether or not our forces are engaged for the victory, whether we have all of our energy focused, or whether our anger against God results in our being perpetually ill, perpetually inactive, unable for one reason or another to lock in to true service, to a true work, to a true calling in life, and to give ourselves totally to it. When we cannot pour ourselves totally into our life's calling, it is because of the hang-ups that we have. I believe that by studying the profile of Zalem today, you may discover much about yourself. So I will get on with this at this point. To summarize about Zalem, in the very beginning of the book, we are introduced to Zalem, who is a mountaineer's son, poor and fatherless. At the age of 16, he makes an arduous pilgrimage to the summit of the highest mountain on Atlantis. Zalem is making the dangerous trek in order to pray to Incal. Incal is the one true God of the Atlanteans, who is represented by the sun. Zalem is seeking assistance in fulfilling his goals in life, to achieve success, fame, and power, and to become one of the foremost citizens of Atlantis. In answer to his prayers, Zalem discovers a load of gold as he wends his way down the mountain. He mines the gold and uses the income to pay for his education. Zalem then leaves his mountain home and moves with his mother to Kaiful, the capital of Atlantis, where he enrolls in the College of Science. There he comes to the attention of the emperor and finds favor with those in the highest ranks of government. After 4 years in Kaiful, the emperor's chief advisor, Prince Menax, adopts Zalem as his son. Menax tells Zalem that his wife and only son had died, and that Zalem reminds him of his son. Menax also has a daughter by the name of Anzime, whom Zalem is in love with. Another main character in the story is Lolix, a beautiful but heartless woman. She is the daughter of the head of the Chaldean armies. Chaldea is a warlike nation that attempted to attack the land of Suern, which is present-day India. By advanced occult powers, the leader of Suern, the Rai Ernan, caused the drowning of the Chaldean soldiers before they could even attack. Subsequently, Lolix, who had witnessed this event, was exiled to Atlantis. We pick up the story just after Zalem has been adopted by Menax. The chapter I will be reading is entitled A Maternal Desertion. The author has told us at the beginning of the book that Zalem tenderly loves his mother. The mere thought of her and the hardships she has endured brings tears to his eyes. If you are following in the book, we are now reading from page 138. Chapter 15, A Maternal Desertion. On leaving my farm home that morning, I had told my mother all that had transpired. This is his adoption by Menax, and said that she should have an escort to the palace, whither after my recent change of fortune, I expected her to go and live in accordance with the instructions of Menax. What an anomalous position was this! Here was I, son by adoption of one of the imperial princes, and by virtue of being recognized brother of his daughter, Anzame, I was a nephew of my sister's uncle, Rai Wallen, the emperor. Yet my mother was not related to any of these royalties and had seen none of them, except the Rai, often enough to enable her to be sure of recognition should she meet them again. But I rejoiced when I thought of the opportunity she would presently have of more intimate acquaintanceship. Having sent the promised escort for her, what was my surprise on returning to the palace at learning from my father that instead of coming, she had sent me a message in writing. I hastily broke the seal and read, in her fine Poseidic chirography, the simple command, Zalem, come to me, presa numinos. I went. Somehow an icy feeling of apprehension was about my heart, a presentiment of something harrowing. When I arrived at the house, my mother, looking, as I thought, rather pale, said, My son, I cannot go to the palace. I have no desire to do so. I am overjoyed at thy success in life, then in thy high place. I may not go with thee. Thou art easy in the midst of noble society. I could never be so. Perhaps thou wilt say that for me thou wilt give it up and remain with me. Do not do so, lest thou feel thus. It is best that thou shouldst endure the pain of knowledge now rather than hereafter. Listen, I have cared for thee during the years of infancy and boyhood, and seen thee arrive at man's estate. Thou needest not this care now. I will go back to the home of the mountains. Mother, talk not so, I interrupted. Hear me through, Zalem. I will go back to the mountains with my husband, he whom thou knowest not, a good man, a lover ere I married thy father, and whom, having wedded this morning, the notice of it hath doubtless by this time been published abroad. And Incala, who came past very opportunely, performed the simple ceremony. My other husband, thy father, I loved not, but did detest, for it was a marriage arranged by my parents against my will. But alas, with my consent, fool that I was to give it. Thou art the fruit of that union, and to me came unwished, for thy father was disliked, abhorred, but dying, left you heritor, not of my dislike. That were too unjust, but must I say it, an object of indifference. I have not been a lacking mother, for as a matter of pride I concealed my feelings. In a way I even love thee. I love my friends, 'tis nothing deeper. I have now to bid thee goodbye, having said which it is necessary too. I heard no more, for I had falled unconscious upon the floor. Was this the mother I had idolized, for whom I had striven so hard in the earlier years and later in Kai-Fu, ere a new object to work for arose, and led me thenceforth with greater determination in the form of a double ideal, love of mother and love of Anzame. O Inkle, my God, oh my God. At last I came out of the horrid dream into which, without regaining consciousness after my swoon, I had passed, a heated nightmare of brain fever. Mother, as I uttered the loved word, Astika Menax, who sat by my bedside, turned away, his eyes brimming with tears. Nay, Zalem, be not troubled. Thou hast been ill near unto death with brain fever these 2 weeks. I will tell thee all tomorrow, perhaps. Thou camest very close to going to await me in the shadowy land. But not long wouldst thou have had to wait, my light, for it would have been but a little while ere I rejoined thee, lad. The story is not long. My mother, being told that good care should aid her in nursing me, said that she would not remain at all, as she doubted not that the skilled care of Menax's private physician could do as well or better for me than she. Wherefore she had gone with her husband to their mountain home. From the hour in which Menax told me this, at the cost of much pain to himself, the subject was dropped and never again referred to by anyone. Once when I went near to the place of my birth and sent a messenger to ask if I was welcome, he came back to my Velx, which was the airship used for travel, and said that a man met him at the door. To him the message was given, and he said, "Say to thy master that my wife bids him come." I went, but could see that she would rather I had not come. She gave me her hand, but did not offer to kiss me, as a mother is wont to do. Her manner but spare me details of this last meeting, and last time I ever saw my Poseid mother. She acted wisely in not going to the palace, constituted as she was. It is a painful subject. Let it be dropped. And the dropping of this subject was the dropping of that pain to the subconscious and the unconscious levels. That, of course, is the place to which many pains and heartaches are dropped, have been dropped by ourselves, because they are too painful to keep in the conscious mind. We cannot get on with our lives if we are to recount them to ourselves daily. And so by and by, when we have the strength, the development, new lifetimes, we move on. We come to the place where these things may come up again in new situations in life when we are able and prepared to deal with them. Nevertheless, the pain and the sorrow and the heartache does influence our thoughts and feelings and our actions for the rest of our lives, unless we enter therapy and or use the violet flame. The violet flame as the great factor of transmutation that softens these records and allows us to attain resolution. Many times the scars are so deep that along with the violet flame, we need to review our psychology and the causes and the cores in our consciousness that come up in daily interchanges, where we see ourselves doing things and saying things that we wish we had never said or did and do not understand why we do them. When we look at Zalem, we find that everything else we hear about him takes off from this moment of extreme agony. And you can see what agony it was when he is weeks unconscious in the state of continuous nightmare. The chapter I have just read to you is a turning point in Zalem's life and psychology. He is forced to confront the fact that the mother he has idolized has deserted him for a lover, and in fact, never loved him at all. His mother's abandonment creates a need for resolution, both outwardly with the women in his life and inwardly with his own feminine nature. This need for resolution becomes the motivating force in his life, even though it is unknown to him. That motivating force is moving him at the subconscious level and the unconscious level. Psychologists recognize the importance of the mother-child relationship in setting the stage for healthy adult functioning and good relationships. How a son perceives and relates to his father or a father figure, and how a daughter perceives and relates to her mother or a mother figure, shapes the son's masculine sense of identity and the daughter's feminine sense of identity. How a son relates to his mother or a mother figure, and how a daughter relates to her father or a father figure, determines how the child will relate to significant members of the opposite sex throughout his or her life. I would now like to analyze Zalem psychology as a case study to illustrate how important it is for each of us to come to grips with the psychological and karmic forces that influence our progress on the path. A major dynamic in Zalem's psychology is that he is fatherless. This is the first thing we notice about him as we open the book. Zalem's arduous climb up the mountain at the beginning of this episode we hear about, of that lifetime, is symbolic of his search for the father principle and the father person. He has not had that example in his life, so he must find it. And he wants to go to the heart of God the Father to do so. His very climbing of the mountain, being so arduous, is a yang activity. The mountain steeped in snow through 2 days and nights, so that he can be at the summit to greet Inkle when the sun rises. So he climbs that mountain that is steeped in snow through all of 2 days and nights, because he will not miss the rising of the sun. He wants to greet his father alone on this mountain and have a heart-to-heart talk with him. He prays to him, he talks to him. It is a profoundly meaningful experience. He is dedicating his life and asking his assistance. He offers himself to the Supreme Father. He seeks Inkle's aid in supporting his mother and Inkle's approval and guidance in setting the course of his career. His climbing the mountain can also be seen as one of the rites of passage into his manhood. The mountain, the sun, and the tremendous power of the elements that are present in this episode are all symbolic of the masculine dimension of life that he seeks to internalize. He is looking for the epitome of his manhood, and he has gone to the right place. It is a very healthy action because he has no one to go to that he may call father. Psychologically, Zalem's goals of success, fame, and power are an expression of his need to resolve his fatherless state. He seeks to be successful to compensate for an absence of father. He aspires to a lofty position of service to the state. The state itself represents the father. One can see the same correlation from an astrological point of view. In astrology, the 10th house rules the father as well as career and status. The sun rules the father and the masculine principle. And as I said, Philos climbed the mountain to be there at sunrise to greet Inkle. To the Atlanteans, the sun represented Inkle. His close, loving relationship to his mother is intensified because he is without his father. At an unconscious level, he may have sensed his mother's lack of genuine love for him, felt guilty about it, and tried even harder to win her love. At a young age, Zalem takes on the role of provider for his mother. He is preoccupied with caring for her. And he does so up to the time he is asked by Prince Menax to move into the palace. Psychologically, this is an attempt to resolve the fatherless state through fulfilling the role of father and becoming the mother's provider. Psychoanalysts would tell us that Zalem had an unresolved Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex, a term coined by Sigmund Freud, is classically described as the struggle of every son to overthrow the father and possess the mother. In girls, the process of wanting to overthrow the mother and possess the father is sometimes called the Electra complex, but the term Oedipus complex is often applied to both boys and girls. All of the teaching that I am giving to you on psychology, which goes somewhat into detail, is what you will need to have when counseling people along life's way as a ministering servant. So I trust you will listen carefully and take notes. The term Oedipus complex is taken from the Greek myth in which Oedipus, in fulfillment of an oracle, unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. According to Freud, the Oedipal situation comes to a healthy resolution through recognition by the young boy that his father and mother are husband and wife, and that he must surrender his mother to his father. Resolution is ultimately completed when the boy subsequently identifies with father, setting the stage for his own unfolding manhood. Psychologists have found that an inadequate resolution of the Oedipus situation can be at the root of emotional disorders. I would like to read to you from the Encyclopedia of Human Behavior by Dr. Robert Goldenson. The psychoanalytic theory holds the Oedipus situation or family romance arises in the phallic period of psychosexual development, gathering force between the ages of 3 and 7. Freud believed it to be a universal phenomenon, holding that it is the source of the powerful taboos against incest found in practically every culture. Most anthropologists, however, deny its universality, since there are many cultures in which it does not appear. Alfred Adler, a disciple of Freud who eventually broke with Freud, interpreted the boy's conflict with his father and his desire to possess the mother in terms of a striving for superiority. That is, the boy wants to prove he is stronger and more attractive than his father. He also held that boys who are pampered by the mothers are likely to overindulge in sexual fantasies about her, and suggested that the girl's attachment to the father and hostility toward the mother stem from a desire to reject feminine inferiority and identify with the superior status of the male. Many types of evidence have been offered to show that the Oedipus situation is common, if not universal, in our culture. Young boys frequently ask the mother which one she loves most, their father or themselves. They may also have dreams or fantasies in which the father goes away, dies, or meets with an accident. The popular song containing the line, "I want a girl just like the girl who married dear old dad," is a perennial favorite with male quartets. On the other side of the coin, many mothers court their sons and are overcritical of their daughters, or try to marry them off as soon as possible. Similarly, many fathers constantly criticize and deprecate their sons, and at the same time make dates with their daughters and show little enthusiasm for their boyfriends. Whether these attitudes are an expression of a basic Oedipal situation or originate this situation, it is an undeniable fact that they do occur. According to the Freudian theory, the Oedipus situation is relinquished in favor of external interests during the latency period, ages 6 to 11. It is then revived briefly in puberty and is normally resolved during adolescence. Two major factors are responsible for this resolution. First, as he develops, the boy identifies increasingly with the male role in life and incorporates his father's goals and standards into his own patterns of behavior. Likewise, the maturing girl gradually finds gratification and fulfillment in the feminine role as a result both of the mother's encouragement and the father's admiration. In Zelem's case, the resolution of the Oedipus complex is carried over into his adult life. This is the result of his over-involvement with his mother and the fact that he does not have a childhood father to identify with. He is still attached to his mother through his young adulthood. He brings his mother with him when he goes to college in Kai-Fu. During his college years, Zelem reads to his mother in the evenings and worries about leaving her alone at night because, as he once told Prince Menax, "She hath an infirmity of nervousness that cannot well withstand my absence at night." He wants his mother to be dependent upon him. His unresolved Oedipus complex is apparent when he and his mother first visit the royal palace in Kai-Fu. A guide approaches Zalem and his mother to take them to the emperor and says, "Come, I will conduct thyself and mother." Zalem thinks to himself, "Mother? How does the fellow know that one so fair and so young-looking is my mother? She might be my sister or even my wife, for aught he knows to the contrary." He writes, "The supposed presumption of the man nettled me, for I was proud not only of my mother's youthful appearance, but also of my own fondly fancied mature looks. I had not infrequently been told that I looked 7 or 8 years older than I really was." Thus Zalem thinks of his mother not only as mother, but as wife, which is the Oedipal dream of the young boy. For Zalem, that dream has come true, and he is playing out the role of husband and father. Modern-day psychologists would call the relationship between Zalem and his mother enmeshed. Enmeshed. Remember that term. Many single-parent families and families where the husband and wife do not have a satisfactory marriage end up with a state of enmeshment among members of the family. Dr. Patricia Lutz explains that enmeshment refers to an extreme form of proximity and intensity in family interactions in which members are over-concerned or over-involved in each other's lives. In extreme cases, the family's lack of differentiation makes any separation from the family an act of betrayal. Belonging to the family dominates all experiences at the expense of each member developing a separate sense of self. In such a family, family members are highly dependent on one another. The personal boundaries between family members are blurred. This means that the distinction between the roles of husband and wife, or the roles of father and mother, or the roles of parents and child are not clear. Often one parent has an over-involved relationship with one of the children, usually the eldest. The child in this relationship is referred to as the parental child. If the child is a male and the over-enmeshment is with his mother, then the child often takes over the role of the husband. Salvador Minuchin, a noted expert on the family, says that one problem with this kind of relationship is that the demands on the parental child can clash with his own childhood needs and exceed his ability to cope with them. In the enmeshed family, the external boundary between the family and outsiders is rigid, which means there may be little interaction with people outside the family. On the other end of the continuum of dysfunctional families is the disengaged family. In the disengaged family, there is little family loyalty. Family members frequently lack the capacity of interdependence or do not request support from others when needed. Communication is difficult. The family's protective function is handicapped because disengaged families tend not to respond when a response is necessary, since individual members may feel isolated from the family. In Zalem's case, when his mother deserted him, they went from being enmeshed to being disengaged. When Zalem's mother married her former lover, she wanted no further contact with Zalem at all. A balanced family, on the other hand, has what psychologists would call a separate connectedness. Family members are interdependent. Spouses, parents, and/or children communicate clearly but do not mesh with each other. The external boundaries of the balanced family are open, which allows the family members to mix appropriately with people outside the family. Let us take another look and a closer look at the dynamics of the mother-child relationship. In her book, Necessary Losses, Judith Viorst, a therapist and student of Freudian psychoanalytic theory, describes the child's loss of the mother as a necessary one because through that loss he begins the growth process. I would like to read to you then from the opening chapter of her book. I believe this is a very valuable book and a necessary book for anyone to read who is going to do any kind of counseling whatsoever and who is wanting to truly understand himself. In chapter 1, she opens with the title, The High Cost of Separation. Then there is the matter of my mother's abandonment of me. Again, this is the common experience. They walk ahead of us and walk too fast and forget us. They are so lost in thoughts of their own, and soon or late they disappear. The only mystery is that we expect it to be otherwise. That is a quote from Marilyn Robinson that begins the chapter. Judith Fjorst writes, "We begin life with loss. We are cast from the womb without an apartment, a charge plate, a job, or a car. We are sucking, sobbing, clinging, helpless babies. Our mother interposes herself between us and the world, protecting us from overwhelming anxiety. We shall have no greater need than this need for our mother." Babies need mothers. Sometimes lawyers, housewives, pilots, writers, and electricians also need mothers. In the early years of life, we embark on the process of giving up what we have to give up to be separate human beings. But until we can learn to tolerate our physical and psychological separateness, our need for our mother's presence, our mother's literal, actual presence, is absolute. For it's hard to become a separate self, to separate both literally and emotionally, to be able to outwardly stand alone and to inwardly feel ourselves to be distinct. There are losses we will have to sustain, though they be balanced by our gains, as we move away from the body and being of our mother. But if our mother leaves us when we are too young, too unprepared, too scared, too helpless, the cost of this leaving, the cost of this loss, the cost of this separation may be too high. There is a time to separate from our mother, but unless we are ready to separate, unless we are ready to leave her and be left, anything is better than separation. A young boy lies in a hospital bed. He is frightened and in pain. Burns cover 40% of his small body. Someone has doused him with alcohol and then, unimaginably, has set him on fire. He cries for his mother. His mother has set him on fire. It doesn't seem to matter what kind of a mother a child has lost or how perilous it may be to dwell in her presence. It doesn't matter whether she hurts or hugs. Separation from mother is worse than being in her arms when the bombs are exploding. Separation from mother is sometimes worse than being with her when she is the bomb. For the presence of mother, our mother, stands for safety. Fear of her loss is the earliest terror we know. There is no such thing as a baby, writes psychoanalyst, pediatrician D.W. Winnicott, observing that babies, in fact, can't exist without mothers. Separation anxiety derives from the literal truth that without a caretaking presence, we would die. A father, of course, can be that caretaking presence, but the caretaking person I'll speak of here will be, because it usually is, our mother, from whom we can endure anything but abandonment. Yet all of us are abandoned by our mother. She leaves us before we can know that she will return. She abandons us to work, to market, to go on vacation, to have another baby, or simply by not being there when we have need of her. She abandons us by having a separate life, a life of her own, and we will have to learn to have one too. But meanwhile, what do we do when we need our mother? We need our mother, and she is not there. What we doubtless do is survive. We surely survive the brief and temporary absences, but they teach us a fear that may set its mark on our life. And if in early childhood, most especially within the first 6 years, we are too deprived of the mother we need and long for, we may sustain an injury emotionally equivalent to being doused with oil and set on fire. Indeed, such deprivation in the first few years of life has been compared to a massive burn or wound. The pain is unimaginable. The healing is hard and slow. The damage, although not fatal, may be permanent. Listen to Anna Freud's description of Patrick, 3 years and 2 months, who was sent during World War II to England's Hampstead nursery, and who assured himself and anybody who cared to listen with the greatest show of confidence that his mother would come for him, that she would put on his overcoat and would take him home with her again. Later, an ever-growing list of clothes that his mother was supposed to put on him was added. She will put on my overcoat and my leggings. She will zip up the zipper. She will put on my pixie hat. When the repetitions of this formula became monotonous and endless, somebody asked him whether he could not stop saying it all over again. He stopped repeating the formula aloud, but his moving lips showed that he was saying it over and over to himself. At the same time, he substituted for the spoken word gestures that showed the position of his pixie hat, the putting on of an imaginary coat, the zipping of the zipper, etc. While the other children were mostly busy with their toys, playing games, making music, etc., Patrick, totally uninterested, would stand somewhere in a corner and move his hands and lips with an absolutely tragic expression on his face. Because the need for a mother is so powerful, most children emerge from despair and seek mother substitutes. And because of this need, it makes sense to assume that when the beloved long-lost mother returns, her child will throw himself joyously into her arms. This isn't what happens. For surprisingly enough, many children, especially under age 3, may greet their returning mother very coldly, treating her with a distance, a blankness that almost seems to say, "I never saw this lady before in my life." This response is called detachment. It is a shutdown of loving feelings, and it deals with loss in a number of different ways. It punishes the person for having left. It serves as a masked expression of rage, for intense and violent hatred is one of the chief responses to being abandoned. And it also may be a defense which can last for hours or days or a lifetime, a defense against the agony of ever loving and ever losing again. Absence makes the heart grow frozen, not fonder. And if this absence is in fact the absence of any stable parent figure, if childhood is a series of such separations, what then? Psychoanalyst Selma Freyberg describes a 16-year-old boy who filed a lawsuit in Alameda County seeking $500,000 on the grounds that in 16 years he had been placed in 16 different foster homes. What is it exactly, the damage for which he is suing? He answers that it's, quote, like a scar on your brain, quote. British psychoanalyst and noted researcher John Bowlby has emphasized that mother and child, as well as the child's relationships with other immediate family members, are significant in the healthy growth of the child. We're talking about the mother and other relationships with immediate family members. He says, quote, among the most significant developments of psychiatry during the past quarter of a century has been the steady growth of evidence that the quality of the parental care which a child receives in his earliest years is of vital importance for his future mental health. What is believed to be essential for mental health is that an infant and young child should experience a warm, intimate, and continuous relationship with his mother or permanent mother substitute, one person who steadily mothers him, in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment. This development of a close relationship of the infant with the mother is called bonding. Bowlby continues, it is this complex, rich, and rewarding relationship with the mother in early years, varied in countless ways by relations with the father and with the brothers and sisters, that child psychiatrists and many others now believe to underlie the development of character and of mental health. Bowlby points out that a child may suffer similar feelings to outright maternal deprivation if the mother is present but unable to give loving care, or if the mother gives loving care on the surface but is in reality hostile or rejects the child at an underlying level. He writes, a state of affairs in which a child does not have this relationship is termed maternal deprivation. This is a general term covering a number of different situations. Thus, a child is deprived even though living at home if his mother or permanent mother substitute is unable to give him the loving care small children need. Naturally, there are many other ways besides deprivation arising from separation or outright rejection, in which parent-child relationships may become unhealthy. The commonest are an unconsciously rejecting attitude underlying a loving one, This, in fact, is Zalom's experience. An excessive demand for love and reassurance on the part of a mother, and a mother's unconsciously getting satisfaction from a child's negative behavior. Bowlby describes 3 types of circumstances in which a child suffers maternal deprivation. The partial deprivation of living with a mother or permanent mother substitute, including a relative whose attitude towards him is unfavorable. The complete deprivation of losing his mother or permanent mother substitute by death, illness, or desertion, and having no familiar relatives to care for him. The complete deprivation of being removed from his mother or permanent mother substitute to strangers by courts of law or by medical or social agencies, including voluntary societies. Naturally, cases coming under the category of partial deprivation are very numerous and of all degrees of severity, from the child whose mother leaves him to scream for many hours because the baby books tell her to do so, to infants whose mothers wholly reject them. Partial forms of maternal deprivation are due sometimes to ignorance, but more often to unconscious hostility on the part of the mother, growing out of experiences in her own childhood. Many child guidance workers believe they make up a large fraction of all the cases they are called upon to treat, and the process of helping a mother to appreciate her true feelings for her child and their origins in her own childhood is an essential part of child guidance. All of those who have families or are entering families, starting families, need to realize how important it is to resolve your own psychology with your mother. I know of a case of a couple who sought sponsorship under El Morya, and he said that the mother requesting sponsorship should first seek that therapy and resolve her relationship with her own mother so that that relationship would not affect the child that El Morya wished to sponsor through them. Morya many times gives assignments of work on psychology and violet flame, hardness of heart, and various things to people seeking sponsorship. Because of their psychology, they cannot receive the high soul he would like to send until they are ready to receive that soul and not to unknowingly damage the soul by repeating the patterns that they have received from their own parents. We have to see that not only then is this resolution necessary for those who are having families, but all of us who would minister. Because when we minister, we are once again in the role of parent to many people. And we can take on the incorrect attitudes of our own parents and deliver to people, instead of comfort and teaching and a way out, criticism, condemnation, and judgment, which can never be a part of our reaching out to help those who come to us in this church. We have to realize that that is no element in counseling. It doesn't help a bit, and it doesn't give a person the necessary will or determination or upliftment or self-esteem to go out and do better. So we are caught between two worlds, the parents of ourselves and ourselves as parenting others, including all life. We have to come to a higher place of oneness with God so that we do not feel that we have to take out our unresolved psychology upon the very ones who need us most and come to us for help, our children or our brothers and sisters on the path. Research shows that when children do not have the proper nurturing, they may end up physically, emotionally, or mentally damaged. They will always be searching for that deep sense of connectedness with another person because they never bonded with a mother figure or father figure. Bowlby continues, when deprived of maternal care, a child's development is almost always retarded, physically, intellectually, and socially. Symptoms of physical and mental illness may appear. Such evidence is disquieting, but skeptics may question whether the check is permanent and whether the symptoms of illness may not easily be overcome. The retrospective and follow-up studies make it clear that such optimism is not always justified and that some children are gravely damaged for life. This is a somber conclusion which must now be regarded as established. This to me is a testimony of a psychologist on psychology. And what we are seeing here is that psychology itself is totally inadequate to meet the needs of ourselves and our children. Psychology is a discipline that enables us to understand the causes and effects of the problems in our psyches. It is helpful, if not even comforting, for us to be able to understand why we are what we are. But this will never take us out of that pocket of the karmic record. We need God, we need the altar, we need a spiritual path, we need our violet flame, we need our sense of community and mutual support that we have. We need to also understand that on some levels, psychology and therapy and understanding ourselves can help us. But if we have a spiritual crisis or a spiritual schism in our souls, which is beyond psychology and a real, genuine spiritual problem, we will only solve the surface problems of our psychology. For example, to make one's peace with God, to understand the meaning of this path of the Ruby Ray Masters, first of all, we have to understand the very principle of sacrifice. Sacrifice comes in the etheric quadrant. It comes and we are able to give it because we have some sense of our Christhood. We have an establishment of an identity in which we find and have a certain quotient of wholeness. And therefore, because we have that wholeness, we can give of ourselves to God. If we are so damaged psychologically that we are nobody and have nothing to give and no Christhood, there is really not the material there that can sacrifice. Sacrifice is an adult experience, an adult action. It should never be demanded of children, because children are in the formative stages of developing a selfhood that they can then offer to God and give to Him. Surrender comes on the 3 o'clock line under the hierarchy of Aries, as sacrifice comes on the Capricorn line of the line 12. Now, this covers the entire quadrant. So the etheric body and the etheric experience is to internalize the Christ so that we have something to place upon the altar. In the conscious mind of the mental quadrant, starting at the 3 o'clock line, we must be able to understand surrender in the light of the ego itself. The ego then being the antithesis of the true identity. We become selfless in the human ego sense and very positive in the presence of the divine ego. We find selflessness can be charted on the 6 o'clock line under the hierarchy of Cancer as we surrender to the Divine Mother and become herself in form. When we have resolved these relationships to the Father on the 12, the Son on the 3, the Mother on the 6, we are ready for service, a life of service under the Holy Spirit on the 9 o'clock line. Our recent dictations have called us to that very calling, the calling of service, service as apostles. You can see that we must have that integration with Father, Mother, and Christ in order to contain that Holy Spirit. Now, if there is an unwillingness to surrender because there is not an overcoming of our inordinate desire, we can see that if we are withholding a part of ourselves in the process as we go through the resolution of psychology, we will come to the place where we cannot receive from God the healing and the wholeness because we ourselves are withholding ourselves from Him. And therefore, in that portion, He withholds Himself from us. So, if there is a spiritual crisis of non-resolution with the altar of God, and with the deep desiring to be in God, then you see that resolution of psychology is going to be on hold. It will not be complete in that lifetime when an individual reserves his private self for his private doings. The path of the ruby ray is actually entered into in good health at the point of Christhood at the age of 33. That is the real time when we find that we are able to achieve it. Before that time, we are creating ourselves and recreating ourselves in the image and likeness of God. So we should not be so hard on ourselves if we are not at that point where we can truly make that surrender, that sacrifice, have that selflessness, because it has to come through the very process of our integration with God, and it has to come even when we have reached a certain resolution in psychology. So the two go hand in hand, and we always have to look for the two parallel paths, the spiritual self and the psychological self. Before concluding this point about psychology not being adequate, I would like to point out that therefore to seek it as the only solution is a mistake for chelas on the path, and not to seek it as an understanding of why we are what we are as we find ourselves is also a mistake. So psychology teaches us where we are and what we are, and the spiritual path gives us the strength and the connection to God to overcome and transcend that psychological self. I have never really seen anyone who has solved his problems by psychology who was in a state of schism with his God. I have never seen it happen. For one thing, most psychologists do not believe in karma and reincarnation. These are not factored in. And secondly, the very action of the violet flame. You can talk and talk and talk about these past situations, but if the records are not transmuted, they will still be there to haunt you. And if you do not believe in the obligation of balancing karma, the karma that put you in this difficult psychological situation, then you will not take accountability for your psychology. People who don't take accountability for their thoughts, words, and deeds also do not take accountability for their psychology. And they are forever blaming their parents or someone else in life who made them the way they are. And this is quite prevalent in the United States today, and I have a very interesting article to read to you about that at another time. So, going on with this, what is so tragic about the problem is that children who suffer neglect and deprivation may treat their own children in the same way, creating a vicious circle that may continue from generation to generation. We come then to the role of father in the family, which is unique. It's also important in the development of the child. As Judith Viorst explains, our fathers are more physical and more stimulating. Our mothers are more verbal and more soothing. Our fathers spend less of their time with us in caretaking tasks. The greater part of their time is spent in play. Our fathers tend to provide us with more novelty, more excitement, more events outside the routine of the everyday, and we in turn react with more arousal. We also, though more so if male, are more inclined to play with our fathers, but we would rather have mommy than daddy when we feel distressed. And although both our mother and father can very deeply invest in their relationship with us, biology may set the stage for a level of mother-child intimacy that fathers can only develop over time. Our fathers present an optional set of rhythms and responses for us to connect to. As a second home base, he makes it safer to roam. With him as an ally, a love, it is safer, too, to show that we're mad when we're mad at our mother. We can hate and not be abandoned, hate and still love. Our father is someone to turn to when we need to resist the lure of re-merger with mother, and when we need to mourn that paradise lost. And she is bringing up the fact that at some point we all have to separate out from our mothers. And it is a very difficult transition. And then there is the temptation to go back to the mother because it is a paradise, a sense of total caring, being cared for, and being totally protected. And so when we finally have to be who we are in life, we mourn the loss of that paradise. of total protection with mother. We cannot let go successfully of symbiotic union unless we can feel the sadness of letting go. Our Father, concerned and supportive, makes that mourning less intense and therefore possible. Psychoanalyst Stanley Greenspan pictures our Father on the shore as we struggle from the symbiotic waters. He holds out a hand and helps us climb out and move on. He is there as our second beloved, as a further and entirely other experience, adding richness and range to our understanding of what love is all about. And if we have no Father, we will long for him. Research on paternal effects on child development supports the idea that the presence of a warm, loving father facilitates a boy's positive sex role development. Research also indicates that absence of the father may contribute to deficits and/or abnormalities in that sex role development, such as the young man without a father being more anxious about sex or more effeminate than a boy with a father. Research shows that the absence of the father in early childhood is also related to antisocial or delinquent behavior. The investigators suggest that this happens because the young boy rejects his identification with his mother, but does not have the opportunity to identify with his father. This aggressive macho behavior is his attempt to assert his masculinity. While Zalem did not outwardly exhibit aggressive behavior, the absence of a loving father in childhood did influence his relationships with women, as we will see. Later in the book, we will also see how strong was Zalem's drive to relive his boyhood with his father. After he dies, Zalem goes to Devachan, which is described as a heaven where one's unfulfilled desires are realized. His first experience there is to live with the father of his childhood's ideal. Devachan is a place and a state of consciousness that Mark Prophet often spoke of as that place where we actually live out our fantasies that we have never fulfilled or realized on earth. The necessity of this is a karmic one. When we retain unfulfilled desires, those desires mandate their fulfillment. And until they are fulfilled, we do not transcend them. And therefore, God provides this compartment of consciousness where people can realize and fulfill desires so that they can work through them and get beyond them to the one all-encompassing desire, which is to enter into that God manifestation, to be totally in God and to be totally absorbed by God. At this point, I have a shift in my lecture, and I think it might be a moment for you to stretch and take a brief break, and we can continue that violet flame section. But even if you're going to give the violet flame, I ask you to walk around a bit while doing it. Calling all our little lambs to come home. I'd like to sing to beloved Kuthumi, the second wise man who has given us all of this teaching. Please make your calls to Kuthumi, and then we'll sing this. $454.
Gentle and healing was your love.
Thank you. Please be seated. We return now to Zalem's embodiment on Atlantis. By his striving for excellence in his studies and career, he wins the affection of Prince Menax, who has lost his wife and son. Menax and Zalem are like two halves missing their other half who come together to make a whole. This shows a positive good karma that Zalem has. In the first instance, he has a direct relationship to God the Father. He goes to that source for the direction of his life. He prays for the means to go to school. He discovers the load of gold, which he then uses to pay for his education. Now, in this instance, he wins the favor and love of one of the highest and best father figures in the story, Prince Menax himself, perhaps second only to the Rai Wallern, who is the emperor of Atlantis. So another part of the equation of Zalem's psychology is that along with a good father figure in Menax, he will also have to deal with a bad father figure in the form of the adept and high priest Menon. Menon belongs to the order of high initiates, which we've been told about. It's called the Sons of the Solitude. They have extensive training for many years, and they are a brotherhood of adepts that have occult powers beyond all imagination. So this high priest is the head of the temple, the main temple of Atlantis in Kai-Fu, where all of the people of Atlantis come, and there is still in that temple at this point in the story the existence of the unfed flame. And that unfed flame burns there, and it was deposited on Atlantis by Jesus Christ when he descended to earth in a brief period to deliver to them the tablets of the law and this unfed flame. So this high priest Menon, who is in reality a black magician, is the tender of that flame and the ruler of the temple. So Atlantis, of course, is in very serious trouble because of his presence there. As the story progresses, Menon is revealed as a betrayer who is instrumental in Zalem's death. So when Prince Menax adopts Zalem, Zalem has the opportunity to resolve the Oedipus complex through identifying with his adopted father. Menax psychologically reinforces the Oedipal resolution by telling Zalem that his mother will be taken care of and properly housed, and that Zalem should now be under his father's roof. Thus he sends a clear message to Zalem's unconscious that Zalem is no longer husband to his mother. Zalem's desire to see his mother benefit from his good fortune of being adopted by Prince Menax is crushed when she tells him she cannot go to the palace, has no desire to do so, and is returning to the mountains. Zalem's fantasy of his mother being the perfect representative of the feminine is shattered when she callously informs him that she detested his father and only married him because her parents had arranged the marriage. His mother's hostile rejection of Zalem comes to him as a complete shock, resulting in the final shattering of his ideal of her as the perfect mother. Zalem cannot consciously handle all of these revelations at once, so he falls unconscious on the floor and goes into a nightmare dream state for 2 weeks. Nightmares are one way that a person tries to resolve traumatic experiences. A nightmare is an attempt at an unconscious level to master our anxiety or to release the emotions associated with it by recreating and reliving the trauma. Dr. Robert Goldenson writes, "The prime motif in nightmares is helpless terror. Typically, the dreamer is plunged into an extremely threatening situation, feels overwhelmed by agonizing dread, makes futile attempts to escape, finds every avenue closed, becomes helplessly paralyzed, develops a mounting sense of oppression, and awakens in a cold sweat." Anyone who has experienced a nightmare will agree that it is one of the most upsetting and painful experiences he has ever undergone. The question is why we have them and what they represent. Goldenson says the most common explanation is that nightmares are simply due to the emotional residue left by harrowing experiences. Such experiences generate more emotion than we can handle at the time they occur, and the terror dream is an unconscious attempt to express that emotion and get it out of our system. Some psychoanalysts offer a different explanation of nightmares. They base their theory on the idea that human beings have an unconscious masochistic drive, an impulse to experience pain and suffering. The nightmare is then interpreted as a form of self-punishment. Even though there may be little evidence for a universal drive of this kind, the explanation may apply in individual cases where the traumatic experience is associated consciously or unconsciously with guilt feelings. Goldenson continues, in fact, the experience may have been traumatic largely because of such feelings. This explanation is consistent with Freud's original interpretation of nightmares. He viewed them as volcanic eruptions of repressed impulses accompanied by intense, paralyzing anxiety. He held that ordinarily the events and images which constitute our dreams effectively disguise and conceal our dangerous impulses. Occasionally, however, this dream work fails, and our guilty wishes and threatening fears burst their bounds and overwhelm us with terrifying fantasies. Although A Dweller on Two Planets does not say much about Zalum's mother, we can deduce something about her psychology. She abhorred her husband and felt justified in doing so because her marriage had been arranged by her parents and she had to leave her lover. But she could not face her own act of injustice were she to abhor her son. So out of pride, she decides to act as the good mother and to conceal her feelings of dislike. Thus, psychologically, she does not have to face herself as a bad mother and holds an image of herself as the self-sacrificing mother. Her inner conflict is revealed when she tells Zalum that he is an object of indifference and yet that she has in a way loved him, but no deeper than she loves her friends. Zalum's later and final visit to his mother is his attempt in an outward way to resolve her rejection of him. When Zalum says she acted wisely in not going to the palace, constituted as she was, he is showing some understanding of his mother's true nature. However, the entire matter is still so painful that he pushes the conflict into the unconscious. From that time on, Zalum is unconsciously driven to play out the feminine split in his relationship with women. Zalum is sexually pulled to Lolix and spiritually pulled to Anzime. He has an affair with Lolix, who represents the bad mother, or the negative feminine, at the same time that he is deeply in love with Anzime, who represents the good mother, or positive feminine. Instead of aligning himself with his new father, who could have helped him, he hides the affair from him. Because he hasn't reconciled his image of the good mother with the bad mother, he projects his image of the bad mother onto Lolix, and he projects his image of the good mother onto Anzime. He needs both images in his life until he comes to his own inner resolution. He says Lolix has no sympathy for those in pain, no sorrow for those in mortal agony. She is so heartless, so cruel, queenly in figure, commanding in personality, beautiful, wonderfully beautiful, the world now, as then, would call the Princess Lolix. She, lioness-like, sided ever with the triumph power. His descriptions of her match her actions when she was present, when the Rai of Swern defeated the Chaldeans. And she had that brutality in her nature and spoke of the entire event with all of the qualities that he is listing. So he is not just investing her with these qualities from his bad mother, they are actually outpictured, which is in the first place why he is attracted to her, because he must attract to himself for resolution his bad mother. Anzime, he says, is at the very antipodes of such traits of character. That is, she is the exact opposite of Lolix. The situation is further complicated by the fact that through his adoption, Zalem is placed in an implicitly incestual position with Anzime because she is now his sister by adoption. Although the law does not forbid marriage, it creates a psychological conflict for Zalem. He writes, "Ought I to feel pleasure or vexation?" Zalem has too much anger and resentment toward the feminine as represented by his mother to rush into marriage with the woman he truly loves, Anzime. So he forms a sexual liaison with Lolix. This shows us that the unresolved portion of ourself makes the greatest demands, and we cannot go forward with our lives until we come to those resolutions. Learning by the teaching on psychology as well as the record of this karmic condition, we can seek diligently through therapy, through the violet flame, through dweller calls, through all of the means at our disposal of going to the altar. We can determine that we are not going to fall into that trap because we see it coming and we pursue the resurrection flame, the transfiguration, the self-transcendence, and we transcend ourselves and move away from that pocket. It takes great foresight and great understanding of our situation to do this, but it can be done, and it should be done whenever possible. It is not apparent to me in this book that Zalem, at the time this is happening, has an awareness of the implications of his psychology or as to why he is doing these things. And so, in his affair with Lolix, he lies to her by telling her that Poseid law forbids marriage with those of alien birth on penalty of death. Anzime remains to him the essence of the divine feminine. She is the goddess whom he loves but cannot yet integrate with in a sexual relationship. But because of the split in his own psyche with the good woman and the bad woman stemming from his experience with his own mother, he cannot have a fulfilling relationship with either Lolix or Anzime. He has to come to terms with the bad mother before he can wed his feminine ideal. Zalem's desire for a relationship with Lolix is accented by the fact that she woos him to be her husband after the custom of her people. This is pleasing to his male ego and soothing to his psyche, so assaulted by his mother's rejection. Like his mother, Zalem takes on a lover outside of marriage and lives a life of duplicity, playing out his unresolved feelings toward the mother in his relationship with Lolix. Freud might say that Zalem's unresolved Oedipus conflict and rejection by his mother provided the setup for him to form the sexual liaison with a critical, hostile female. Freud explained this dynamic as the bringing together into a sexual relationship of the two vectors of the sexual and aggressive drive, Eros and Thanatos. Uniting these two energies into one intensifies the sexual experience. Carried to its ultimate perversion, you have the making of a sadist and the sadistic masochistic sexual relationship. Analysts have described the cavalier way that some men treat women as the Don Juan personality, love 'em and leave 'em. Although Zalem's behavior does not fit the classic pattern of a man who has multiple liaisons, there is a certain Don Juan flavor to it. Dr. Robert Goldenson writes, according to some psychoanalysts, men who seek conquest after conquest may be unconsciously avenging themselves against all women for disappointment experienced with their mother in early life. Many women with hysterical personalities are provocative and exhibitionistic with men, but their purpose is to make a conquest rather than to establish a deeper or even a sexual relationship with them. In some cases, they capriciously flit from one superficial affair to another as a means of concealing sexual fears or frigidity. Similar characteristics are found in their male counterpart, the Don Juan, who also seeks to deny or hide his inadequacies by making one conquest after another. These relationships are never fully gratifying, but in the process of making them, he derives secondary satisfaction from setting up dramatic situations, outwitting his rivals, and overcoming the lady's hesitations. End of quote by Goldenson. Jung might say that Zalem needs to keep Anzime in the role of the untouchable goddess until he has resolved the terrible mother, which he attempts to do in his affair with Lolix.
In other words, Jung would see Zalum's relationship with Anzime and Lolix in terms of anima projection. I would like to read to you about Carl Jung's concepts of the anima and the animus from his book, Man and His Symbols. The section I am reading from was written by Dr. M.L. von Franz under the direction and supervision of Carl Jung. Woman within. Difficult and subtle ethical problems are not invariably brought up by the appearance of the shadow itself. Often another inner figure emerges. If the dreamer is a man, he will discover a female personification of his unconscious, and it will be a male figure in the case of a woman. Often this second symbolic figure turns up behind the shadow, bringing up new and different problems. Jung called its male and female forms animus and anima. The anima is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies in a man's psyche, such as vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational, capacity for personal love, feeling for nature, and last but not least, his relation to the unconscious. It is no mere chance that in olden times priestesses, like the Greek Sibyl, were used to fathom the divine will and to make connection with the gods. A particularly good example of how the anima is experienced as an inner figure in a man's psyche is found in the medicine men and prophets, the shamans among the Eskimo and other Arctic tribes. Some of these even wear women's clothes or have breasts depicted on their garments in order to manifest their inner feminine side, the side that enables them to connect with the ghost land, what we call the unconscious. One reported case tells of a young man who was being initiated by an older shaman and who was buried by him in a snow hole. He fell into a state of dreaminess and exhaustion. In this coma, he suddenly saw a woman who emitted light. She instructed him in all he needed to know, and later, as his protective spirit, helped him to practice his difficult profession by relating him to the powers of the beyond. Such an experience shows the anima as the personification of a man's unconscious. In its individual manifestation, the character of a man's anima is as a rule shaped by his mother. If he feels that his mother had a negative influence on him, his anima will often express itself in irritable, depressed moods, uncertainty, insecurity, and touchiness. If, however, he is able to overcome the negative assaults on himself, they can even serve to reinforce his masculinity. Within the soul of such a man, the negative mother anima figure will endlessly repeat this theme. I am nothing. Nothing makes any sense. With others it's different, but for me, I enjoy nothing. These anima moods cause a sort of dullness, a fear of disease, of impotence, or of accidents. The whole of life takes on a sad and oppressive aspect. Such dark moods can even lure a man to suicide, in which case the anima becomes a death demon. She appears in this role in Cocteau's film, Orphée. The French call such an anima figure a femme fatale. A milder version of this dark anima is personified by the Queen of the Night in Mozart's Magic Flute. The Greek sirens or the German Lorelei also personify this dangerous aspect of the anima, which in this form symbolizes destructive illusion. The following Siberian tale illustrates the behavior of such a destructive anima. One day a lonely hunter sees a beautiful woman emerging from the deep forest on the other side of the river. She waves at him and sings, "Oh, come, lonely hunter, in the stillness of dusk. Come, come, I miss you, I miss you. Now I will embrace you, embrace you. Come, come, my nest is near, my nest is near. Come, come, lonely hunter, now in the stillness of dusk." He throws off his clothes and swims across the river, but suddenly she flies away in the form of an owl, laughing mockingly at him. When he tries to swim back to find his clothes, he drowns in the cold river. In this tale, the anima symbolizes an unreal dream of love, happiness, and maternal warmth, her nest, a dream that lures men away from reality. The hunter is drowned because he ran after a wishful fantasy that could not be fulfilled. Another way in which the negative anima in a man's personality can be revealed is in waspish, poisonous, effeminate remarks by which he devalues everything. Remarks of this sort always contain a cheap twisting of the truth and are in a subtle way destructive. There are legends throughout the world in which a poisoned damsel, as they call her in the Orient, appears. She is a beautiful creature who has weapons hidden in her body or a secret poison with which she kills her lovers during their first night together. In this guise, the anima is as cold and reckless as certain uncanny aspects of nature itself, and in Europe is often expressed to this day by the belief in witches. If, on the other hand, a man's experience of his mother has been positive, this can also affect his anima in typical but different ways, with the result that he either becomes effeminate or is preyed upon by women, and thus is unable to cope with the hardships of life. An anima of this sort can turn men into sentimentalists, or they may become as touchy as old maids, or as sensitive as the fairy tale princess who could feel a pea under 30 mattresses. A still more subtle manifestation of a negative anima appears in some fairy tales in the form of a princess who asks her suitors to answer a series of riddles, or perhaps to hide themselves under her nose. If they cannot give the answers, or if she can find them, they must die, and she invariably wins. The anima in this guise involves men in a destructive intellectual game. We can notice the effect of this anima trick in all those neurotic pseudo-intellectual dialogues that inhibit a man from getting into direct touch with life and its real decisions. He reflects about life so much that he cannot live it, and loses all his spontaneity and outgoing feeling. The most frequent manifestations of the anima takes the form of erotic fantasy. Men may be driven to nurse their fantasies by looking at films and striptease shows, or by daydreaming over pornographic material. This is a crude, primitive aspect of the anima, which becomes compulsive only when a man does not sufficiently cultivate his feeling relationships, when his feeling attitude toward life has remained infantile. All these aspects of the anima have the same tendency that we have observed in the shadow. That is, they can be projected so that they appear to the man to be the qualities of some particular woman. It is the presence of the anima that causes a man to fall suddenly in love when he sees a woman for the first time and knows at once that this is she. In this situation, the man feels as if he has known this woman intimately for all time. He falls for her so helplessly that it looks to outsiders like complete madness. Women who are of fairy-like character especially attract such anima projections, because men can attribute almost anything to a creature who is so fascinatingly vague, and can thus proceed to weave fantasies around her. The projection of the anima in such a sudden and passionate form as a love affair can greatly disturb a man's marriage, and can lead to the so-called human triangle with its accompanying difficulties. A bearable solution to such a drama can be found only if the anima is recognized as an inner power. The secret aim of the unconscious in bringing about such an entanglement is to force a man to develop and to bring his own being to maturity by integrating more of his unconscious personality and bringing it into his real life. But I have said enough about the negative side of the anima. There are just as many important positive aspects. The anima is, for instance, responsible for the fact that a man is able to find the right marriage partner. Another function is at least equally important. Whenever a man's logical mind is incapable of discerning facts that are hidden in his unconscious, the anima helps him to dig them out. Even more vital is the role that the anima plays in putting a man's mind in tune with the right inner values, and thereby opening the way into more profound inner depths. It is as if an inner radio becomes tuned to a certain wavelength that excludes irrelevancies, but allows the voice of the great man to be heard. In establishing this inner radio reception, the anima takes on the role of guide or mediator to the world within and to the self. That is how she appears in the example of the initiations of the shamans that I described earlier. This is the role of Beatrice in Dante's Paradiso, and also of the goddess Isis when she appeared in a dream to Apuleius, the famous author of The Golden Ass, in order to initiate him into a higher, more spiritual form of life. The dream of a 45-year-old psychotherapist may help to make clear how the anima can be an inner guide. As he was going to bed on the evening before he had this dream, he thought to himself that it was hard to stand alone in life, lacking the support of a church. He found himself envying people who are protected by the maternal embrace of an organization. He had been born a Protestant, but no longer had any religious affiliation. This was his dream. I am in the aisle of an old church filled with people. Together with my mother and my wife, I sit at the end of the aisle in what seem to be extra seats. I am to celebrate the Mass as a priest, and I have a big mass book in my hands, or rather a prayer book or an anthology of poems. This book is not familiar to me, and I cannot find the right text. I am very excited because I have to begin soon, and to add to my troubles, my mother and wife disturb me by chattering about unimportant trifles. Now the organ stops and everyone is waiting for me. So I get up in a determined way and ask one of the nuns who is kneeling behind me to hand me her mass book and point out the right place, which she does in an obliging manner. Now, like a sort of sexton, this same nun precedes me to the altar, which is somewhere behind me and to the left, as if we are approaching it from a side aisle. The mass book is like a sheet of pictures, a sort of board 3 feet long and a foot wide, and on it is the text with ancient pictures in columns, one beside the other. First, the nun has to read a part of the liturgy before I begin, and I have still not found the right place in the text. She has told me that it is number 15, but the numbers are not clear and I cannot find it. With determination, however, I turn toward the congregation, and now I have found number 15, the next to the last on the board. Although I do not yet know if I shall be able to decipher it, I want to try all the same. I wake up. This dream expressed in a symbolic way an answer from the unconscious to the thoughts that the dreamer had the evening before. It said to him, in effect, you yourself must become a priest in your own inner church, in the church of your soul. Thus the dream shows that the dreamer does have the helpful support of an organization. He is contained in a church, not an external church, but one that exists inside his own soul. The people, all his own psychic qualities, want him to function as the priest and celebrate the Mass himself. Now the dream cannot mean the actual Mass, for its Mass book is very different from the real one. It seems that the idea of the Mass is used as a symbol, and therefore it means a sacrificial act in which the divinity is present so that man can communicate with it. This symbolic solution is, of course, not generally valid, but relates to this particular dreamer. It is a typical solution for a Protestant because a man who, through real faith, is still contained in the Catholic Church usually experiences his anima in the image of the Church herself, and her sacred images are for him the symbols of the unconscious. Our dreamer did not have this ecclesiastical experience, and this is why he had to follow an inner way. Furthermore, the dream told him what he should do. It said your mother boundness and your extroversion, represented by the wife who is an extrovert, distract you and make you feel insecure, and by meaningless talk keep you from celebrating the inner Mass. But if you follow the nun, the introverted anima, she will lead you as both a servant and a priest. She owns a strange Mass book which is composed of 16 4x4 ancient pictures. Your Mass consists of your contemplation of these psychic images that your religious anima reveals to you. In other words, if the dreamer overcomes his inner uncertainty caused by his mother complex, he will find that his life task has the nature and quality of a religious service, and that if he meditates about the symbolic meaning of the images in his soul, they will lead him to this realization. In this dream, the anima appears in her proper positive role, that is, as a mediator between the ego and the self. The 4x4 configuration of the pictures points to the fact that the celebration of this inner Mass is performed in the service of totality. As Jung has demonstrated, the nucleus of the psyche, the self, normally expresses itself in some kind of fourfold structure. The number 4 is also connected with the anima because, as Jung noted, there are 4 stages in its development. The first stage is best symbolized by the figure of Eve, which represents purely instinctual and biological relations. The second can be seen in Faust's Helen. She personifies a romantic and aesthetic level that is, however, still characterized by sexual elements. The third is represented, for instance, by the Virgin Mary, a figure who raises love, eros, to the heights of spiritual devotion. The fourth type is symbolized by sapientia, wisdom transcending even the most holy and the most pure. Of this, another symbol is the Shulamite in the Song of Solomon. In the psychic development of modern man, this stage is rarely reached. The Mona Lisa comes nearest to such a wisdom anima. At this stage, I am only pointing out that the concept of fourfoldness frequently occurs in certain types of symbolic material. The essential aspects of this will be discussed later. But what does the role of the anima as guide to the inner world mean in practical terms? This positive function occurs when a man takes seriously the feelings, moods, expectations, and fantasies sent by his anima, and when he fixes them in some form, for example, in writing, painting, sculpture, musical composition, or dancing. When he works at this patiently and slowly, other more deeply unconscious material wells up from the depths and connects with the earlier material. After a fantasy has been fixed in some specific form, it must be examined both intellectually and ethically with an evaluating feeling reaction. And it is essential to regard it as being absolutely real. There must be no lurking doubt that this is only a fantasy. If this is practiced with devotion over a long period, the process of individuation gradually becomes the single reality and can unfold in its true form. Many examples from literature show the anima as a guide and mediator to the inner world. In a medieval mystical text, an anima figure explains her own nature as follows. I am the flower of the field and the lily of the valleys. I am the mother of fair love and of fear and of knowledge and of holy hope. I am the mediator of the elements, making one to agree with another. That which is warm I make cold, and the reverse, and that which is dry I make moist, and the reverse. And that which is hard I soften. I am the law in the priest, and the word in the prophet, and the counsel in the wise. I will kill, and I will make to live, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. In the Middle Ages, there took place a perceptible spiritual differentiation in religious, poetical, and other cultural matters, and the fantasy world of the unconscious was recognized more clearly than before. During this period, the knightly cult of the lady signified an attempt to differentiate the feminine side of man's nature in regard to the outer woman, as well as in relation to the inner world. The lady to whose service the knight pledged himself and for whom he performed his heroic deeds was naturally a personification of the anima. The name of the carrier of the Grail in Wolfram von Eschenbach's version of the legend is especially significant. Conduire amour, guide in love matters. She taught the hero to differentiate both his feelings and his behavior toward women. Later, however, this individual and personal effort of developing the relationship with the anima was abandoned when her sublime aspect fused with the figure of the Virgin, who then became the object of boundless devotion and praise. When the anima as Virgin was conceived as being all positive, her negative aspects found expression in the belief in witches. In China, the figure parallel to that of Mary is the goddess Kuan Yin. A more popular Chinese anima figure is the Lady of the Moon, who bestows the gift of poetry or music on her favorites and can even give them immortality. In India, the same archetype is represented by Shakti, Parvati, Rati, and many others. Among the Muslims, she is chiefly Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad. Worship of the anima as an officially recognized religious figure brings the serious disadvantage that she loses her individual aspects. On the other hand, if she is regarded as an exclusively personal being, there is the danger that if she is projected into the outer world, it is only there that she can be found. This latter state of affairs can create endless trouble because man becomes either the victim of his erotic fantasies or compulsively dependent on one actual woman. Only the painful, but essentially simple, decision to take one's fantasies and feelings seriously can at this stage prevent a complete stagnation of the inner process of individuation, because only in this way can a man discover what this figure means as an inner reality. Thus the anima becomes again what she originally was, the woman within who conveys the vital messages of the self. Jung's point is that every man has this anima within him, and this personification of woman is made up of the elements of mother as well as of karmic elements. In order to arrive at the perfected woman, Jung is saying we have to go through the fantasies, we have to go through the feelings we have regarding this inner woman. We have to work through them until we have resolved ourselves with them. Then we can transcend them. Then we can have as our role model Mother Mary or Kuan Yin, etc., who are idealized beings. The animus, the man within. The male personification of the unconscious in woman, the animus, exhibits both good and bad aspects, as does the anima in man. But the animus does not so often appear in the form of an erotic fantasy or mood. It is more apt to take the form of a hidden, sacred conviction. When such a conviction is preached with a loud, insistent, masculine voice, or imposed on others by means of brutal, emotional scenes, the underlying masculinity in a woman is easily recognized. However, even in a woman who is outwardly very feminine, the animus can be an equally hard, inexorable power. One may suddenly find oneself up against something in a woman that is obstinate, cold, and completely inaccessible. One of the favorite themes that the animus repeats endlessly in the ruminations of this kind of woman goes like this: "The only thing in the world that I want is love, and he doesn't love me." Or, "In this situation there are only two possibilities, and both are equally bad." The animus never believes in exceptions. One can rarely contradict an animus opinion because it is usually right in a general way, yet it seldom seems to fit the individual situation. It is apt to be an opinion that seems reasonable, but beside the point. Just as the character of a man's anima is shaped by his mother, so the animus is basically influenced by a woman's father. The father endows his daughter's animus with a special coloring of unarguable, incontestably true convictions, convictions that never include the personal reality of the woman herself as she actually is. This is why the animus is sometimes like the anima, a demon of death. For example, in a gypsy fairy tale, a handsome stranger is received by a lonely woman, in spite of the fact that she has had a dream warning her that he is the king of the dead. After he has been with her for a time, she presses him to tell her who he really is. At first he refuses, saying that she will die if he tells her. She insists, however, and suddenly he reveals to her that he is death himself. The woman immediately dies of fright. Viewed mythologically, the beautiful stranger is probably a pagan father image or god image who appears here as king of the dead, like Hades' abduction of Persephone. But psychologically, he represents a particular form of the animus that lures women away from all human relationships and especially from all contacts with real men. He personifies a cocoon of dreamy thoughts filled with desire and judgments about how things ought to be, which cut a woman off from the reality of life. The negative animus does not appear only as a death demon. In myths and fairy tales, he plays the role of robber and murderer. One example is Bluebeard, who secretly kills all his wives in a hidden chamber. In this form, the animus personifies all those semi-conscious, cold, destructive reflections that invade a woman in the small hours, especially when she has failed to realize some obligation of feeling. It is then that she begins to think about the family heritage and matters of that kind, a sort of web of calculating thoughts filled with malice and intrigue, which get her into a state where she even wishes death to others. "When one of us dies, I'll move to the Riviera," said a woman to her husband when she saw the beautiful Mediterranean coast, a thought that was rendered relatively harmless by reason of the fact that she said it. By nursing secret destructive attitudes, a wife can drive her husband and a mother her children into illness, accident, or even death. Or she may decide to keep the children from marrying, a deeply hidden form of evil that rarely comes to the surface of the mother's conscious mind. A naive old woman once said to me while showing me a picture of her son, who was drowned when he was 27, "I prefer it this way. It's better than giving him away to another woman." A strange passivity and paralysis of all feeling, or a deep insecurity that can lead almost to a sense of nullity, may sometimes be the result of an unconscious animus opinion. In the depths of woman's being, the animus whispers, "You are hopeless. What's the use of trying? There is no point in doing anything. Life will never change for the better." Unfortunately, whenever one of these personifications of the unconscious takes possession of our mind, it seems as if we ourselves are having such thoughts and feelings. The ego identifies with them to the point where it is unable to detach them and see them for what they are. One is really, quote, possessed by the figure from the unconscious. Only after the possession has fallen away does one realize with horror that one has said and done things diametrically opposed to one's real thoughts and feelings, that one has been the prey of an alien psychic factor. This is what we call aggressive mental suggestion. This is exactly what we're talking about when we name that in our decrees. Like the animus does not merely consist of negative qualities such as brutality, recklessness, empty talk, and silent, obstinate, evil ideas. He too has a very positive and valuable side. He too can build a bridge to the self through his creative activity. The following dream of a woman of 45 may help to illustrate this point. 2 veiled figures climb onto the balcony and into the house. They are swathed in black hooded coats, and they seem to want to torment me and my sister. She hides under the bed, but they pull her out with a broom and torture her. Then it is my turn. The leader of the 2 pushes me against the wall, making magical gestures before my face. In the meantime, his helper makes a sketch on the wall, and when I see it, I say, in order to seem friendly, "Oh, but this is well drawn." Now suddenly my tormentor has the noble head of an artist, and he says proudly, "Yes, indeed," and begins to clean his spectacles. The sadistic aspect of these 2 figures was well known to the dreamer, for in reality she frequently suffered bad attacks of anxiety, during which she was haunted by the thought that people she loved were in great danger, or even that they were dead. But the fact that the animus figure in the dream is double suggests that the burglars personify a psychic factor that is dual in its effect, and that could be something quite different from these tormenting thoughts. The sister of the dreamer who runs away from the men is caught and tortured. In reality, this sister died when fairly young. She had been artistically gifted but had made very little use of her talent. Next, the dream reveals that the veiled burglars are actually disguised artists, and that if the dreamer recognizes their gifts, which are her own, they will give up their evil intentions. What is the deeper meaning of the dream? It is that behind the spasms of anxiety, there is indeed a genuine and mortal danger. But there is also a creative possibility for the dreamer. She, like the sister, had some talent as a painter, but she doubted whether painting could be a meaningful activity for her. Now her dream tells her in the most earnest way that she must live out this talent. If she obeys, the destructive, tormenting animus will be transformed in a creative and meaningful activity. As in this dream, the animus often appears as a group of men. In this way, the unconscious symbolizes the fact that the animus represents a collective rather than a personal element. Because of this collective mindedness, women habitually refer, when their animus is speaking through them, to one or they or everybody, and in such circumstances their speech frequently contains the words always and should and ought. A vast number of myths and fairy tales tell of a prince turned by witchcraft into a wild animal or monster, who is redeemed by the love of a girl, a process symbolizing the manner in which the animus becomes conscious. Dr. Henderson has commented on the significance of this Beauty and the Beast motif in the preceding chapter. Very often the heroine is not allowed to ask questions about her mysterious unknown lover and husband, or she meets him only in the dark and may never look at him. The implication is that by blindly trusting and loving him, she will be able to redeem her bridegroom. But this never succeeds. She always breaks her promise and finally finds her lover again only after a long, difficult quest and much suffering. The parallel in life is that the conscious attention a woman has to give to her animus problem takes much time and involves a lot of suffering. But if she realizes who and what her animus is and what he does to her, and if she faces these realities instead of allowing herself to be possessed, her animus can turn into an invaluable inner companion who endows her with the masculine qualities of initiative, courage, objectivity, and spiritual wisdom. The animus, just like the anima, exhibits 4 stages of development. He first appears as a personification of mere physical power, for instance, as an athletic champion or muscle man. In the next stage, he possesses initiative and the capacity for planned action. In the third phase, the animus becomes the Word, often appearing as a professor or clergyman. Finally, in his 4th manifestation, the animus is the incarnation of meaning. On this highest level, he becomes, like the anima, a mediator of the religious experience whereby life acquires new meaning. He gives the woman spiritual firmness and invisible inner support that compensates for her outer softness. The animus in his most developed form sometimes connects the woman's mind with the spiritual evolution of her age and can thereby make her even more receptive than a man to new creative ideas. It is for this reason that in earlier times women were used by many nations as diviners and seers. The creative boldness of their positive animus at times expresses thoughts and ideas that stimulate men to new enterprises. The inner man within a woman's psyche can lead to marital troubles similar to those mentioned in the section on the anima. What makes things especially complicated is the fact that the possession of one partner by the animus or anima may automatically exert such an irritating effect upon the other that he or she becomes possessed too. Animus and anima always tend to drag conversation down to a very low level and to produce a disagreeable, irascible, emotional atmosphere. As I mentioned before, the positive side of the animus can personify an enterprising spirit, courage, truthfulness, and in the highest form, spiritual profundity. Through him, a woman can experience the underlying process of her cultural and personal objective situation and can find her way to an intensified spiritual attitude to life. This naturally presupposes that her animus ceases to represent opinions that are above criticism. The woman must find the courage and inner broad-mindedness to question the sacredness of her own convictions. Only then will she be able to take in the suggestions of the unconscious, especially when they contradict her animus opinions. Only then will the manifestations of the self get through to her, and will she be able to consciously understand their meaning. This teaching is very profound, and I would like to tell you that in the final analysis, what we find is that the perfected animus in woman is the manifestation of the Holy Christ Self and the I Am Presence. And the perfected anima in man is the same. And as we are moving toward that perfected state, we are working through what we have endowed ourselves with, what our mothers have endowed us with as we are men, what our fathers have endowed us with as we are women, and what we have brought with us from other lifetimes. We build upon those fourfold steps because they represent the four quadrants of our cosmic clock, which represent our four lower bodies. So we have to go through the image of mother in the etheric quadrant, the mental quadrant, the astral body, and the physical. When all these come together and we recognize our female counterpart as men, our male counterpart as women, we are in tune with the androgynous self. And if we are coming to the point of responding in the level of the unconscious to the I Am Presence as the father figure, or in the unconscious to the mother figure, we are then in contact with the highest manifestation of our counterpart, our twin flame. You can see how the fallen woman, or the femme fatale, as well as the fallen masculine, if we allow that presence to remain in our unconscious and do not see it as a specter, as something that is not ourselves, but something that is residing there as a point of psychological development or karmic development, if we do not see it as separate from ourselves, then we will be its instrument. We will be the instrument of this specter that is in itself, you might say, a sort of dweller. It dwells there as a conglomerate of our images of father or of mother. And so until we see it for what it is, and our souls as wed alchemically to Christ, we are not objective. And when we are not objective is when we give vent to, through our speech and through our feelings and our thoughts, to the untransmuted masculine as women, to the untransmuted feminine as men. So let us watch what we put out and recognize that there is somebody occupying that unconscious who has done so without our leave, and that is the formation of a clay mold of a persona, a mask of father, a mask of mother, handed down to us in the stages of development of non-discrimination and of absolute trust in parents. Now that we have come to the point of desiring integration with our divine parents and with Alpha and Omega, we then can take the best of our human parents, the best of the ascended masters and the Elohim, and create our own clay image, which is then fired and becomes permanent. This is the heart and essence of this message from Carl Jung, who did have a profound understanding of the human psyche. Thus, Jung would explain Zelem's attraction to Lolix and her attraction to him as anima and animus projection. More simply, his anima fell for her animus. Zelem projected into Lolix his bad mother. Lolix projected into Zalem her bad father, which she had, and is described in the book. Neither one was ready to give up the bad parent, and so they had to come together in the relationship of their bad parents until this could be resolved. What we find out later in the book is that it is never resolved until his most recent embodiment. This particular interchange could not be resolved for 12,000 years. Their souls had to grow, their karmic cycles had to return, their psyches had to be ready. This is why I think it's so important to know this book, to know its contents, because we must shorten the days of our travail and of our returning karma. We want it to return in this life. We want to graduate with maximum credits, hopefully the whole 100%. So to accelerate the process, we must understand the path of the ruby ray, as well as these profound principles of psychology. Zalem projects his negative anima, the negative elements of his own feminine nature, and his resentment, anger, and guilt toward his mother into his relationship with Lolix. His negative anima has been formed, at least partially, from his internalization of his mother's negative behavior toward him and his father. To summarize, there are a complex set of motivations that Zalem expresses in his relationship with Lolix. First, he is asserting his masculinity, thereby proving himself as a man. Second, Zalem desires to symbolically heal his mother and raise her up through his relationship with Lolix. This is a very common situation where people marry their father's or their mother's personality in a different body to heal them, because the child always feels guilty for the sins of his parents, that he has caused the shortcomings of his parents. So therefore he must heal his parents. 3, he desperately wants the bad mother to love him, and at the same time he seeks to punish her. For her part, Lolix is playing out her self-hatred and desire for self-punishment by subjecting herself to Zalem's cold treatment. You will remember that her father was the cruel chief of the Chaldean armies. She in turn worshipped power and wanted to conquer the masculine so she could gain power herself. The drama heightens when Lolix becomes pregnant and Zalem arranges for the child to be placed in a home secretly provided. In so doing, Zalem rejects Lolix as the mother of his child. He is on the one hand hostile to Lolix, and on the other hand rejecting himself by rejecting his own child. The deadly nature of their unconscious drives is given full play when Lolix becomes pregnant a second time and arranges to have an abortion without telling Zalem. Finally, Zalem determines that he can no longer stand the combination of his affair with Lolix and his unrequited, unfulfilled love for Anzame. At first, he hopes that Lolix will tire of him, but when she doesn't, he determines to get rid of her, as we will read later in the book. His actions from that point on lead to his ultimate self-destruction. Zalem's self-defeating behavior has been characterized by Freudian analysts as an attempt to undo and thereby resolve the original trauma by repeating it, each time in the hope of a different ending. Judith Viorst deals with this repetition compulsion syndrome in her book Necessary Losses. There is in human nature a compulsion to repeat. Indeed, it is called the repetition compulsion. It impels us to do again and again what we have done before, to attempt to restore an earlier state of being. It impels us to transfer the past, our ancient longings, our defenses against those longings, onto the present. Thus, whom we love and how we love are revivals, unconscious revivals of early experience, even when revival brings us pain. And although we may play Iago instead of Othello, Desdemona instead of Iago, we will act out the same old tragedies unless awareness and insight intervene. That little boy, for instance, may play out his helplessness as a passive, submissive husband. He may play out his murderous rage as a wife-beating husband. He may choose his mother's role and become a cold, you have it to beg me for it husband. Or he may, like his absent father, simply abandon his wife and his own son to their fate. The little boy may marry the psychological spitting image of his mother. He may work his wife over until she becomes that mother. He may ask his wife the impossible, and then when she refuses him, he may rail, "You always refuse me, just like my mother." In repeating the past, that boy might repeat his fury or humiliation or grief, or he might repeat the tactics by which he beat back fury, humiliation, grief. In repeating the past, he will update the script to include the shadings of subsequent experience. But whom he loves and how he loves will reflect that whining, pleading, raging boy. For many men, the denial of dependency on their mother is repeated in their subsequent relationships, sometimes by an absence of any sexual interest in women, sometimes by a pattern of loving and leaving them. For other men and women, however, dependency is the point of love relationships, and whomever they take to bed will always be, at least in their head, the ever yearned for, gratifying mother. We repeat the past by reproducing earlier conditions, challenging as that can sometimes be. Like the woman described by Freud, who managed to find not one, not two, but 3 different husbands, all of whom fell fatally ill soon after they were married and subsequently had to be nursed by her on their deathbed. A lesbian relationship, like the one Karen Snow described in her novel Willow, may also repeat love patterns of early childhood. Out of boredom, Pete takes a job welding in an aircraft plant, but the long hours of manual labor do not change her into the man. She is still the self-sacrificing one who will continue to cook and wash and iron and scrub floors. She will spend large chunks of her wages on Willow. The masculine-feminine bond is frail compared with this mother-daughter bond. Each girl is merely moving in grooves that were carved deep in her early in childhood. Willow has always been the aloof princess, served and scolded by a coarse, martyred woman. In fact, by 2 martyred women, her mother and her sister. Pete has always been subservient to a glamorous mother who was usually away from home achieving. She has been housekeeper and cook, too, for a busy, burly father who wanted a son. In describing his taste in women, the baby doctor political activist Benjamin Spock also reveals a repetition compulsion, for as he points out, "I have always been fascinated by rather severe women I then could charm despite their severity." The model for these women, as Dr. Spock is well aware, was his own demanding and highly critical mother. And if in his early 80s he is indeed a most exceptionally charming man, the wish to win over his mother may help explain why. "I have always been amazed," he says, "at men who were able to love somewhat soft women. Such conquests," he suggests, "are too easy to matter. I always needed someone who thought I was special but who also offered a challenge." He says that both his first wife, Jane, and his second wife, Mary Morgan, are versions, although in quite different ways, of this type. Because Dr. Spock volunteered to give permission for you and Mary to talk about me behind my back, let me note here that Mary Morgan disagrees. She maintains that she isn't this critical type of woman that Spock is describing, but she adds, "He keeps trying to make me into that person," which is also, of course, a compulsion to repeat. We also repeat the past by superimposing parental images onto the present, myopic as that frequently can be, failing to recognize that being gentle doesn't have to mean being weak. Daddy, alas, was gentle, but he was weak. That silence may be companionable, not punishing. Mother's silences were always punishing. And that gentle, quiet people may be offering something new if we could but see it. We even repeat the past when we quite consciously are trying not to repeat it. Hopeless as that may turn out to be, like the woman who disdained her parents' conventional and patriarchal marriage and decided that hers would have an entirely new format. Was her mother completely ruled by her bossy husband? Well, then this lady's mate would be the ruled-over type, and furthermore, she would be so unconventional, modern, and free that she would openly bring her lovers into their house. But she then allowed her lovers to abuse her and humiliate her. I suppose her notion of modern was anything goes, and so in the freewheeling life as an autonomous woman and wife, she arranged to repeat her mother's despised submissiveness. The repetition compulsion, writes Freud, explains why this one is always betrayed by his friends, and why that one is always abandoned by his protégés, and why each of a lover's love affairs may pass through similar stages and end the same way. For although there are people, writes Freud, who seem to be pursued by a malignant fate or possessed by some demonic power, their fate is for the most part arranged by themselves and determined by early infantile influences. I would comment on that our fates are determined by ourselves through all of our past lives, incarnations, and karma, in addition to that infantile influences on our psychology. They are but a speck in a long chain of specks of lifetimes we have lived. It seems reasonable to us to wish to transfer the pleasing past onto the present, to seek to repeat the delights of earlier days, to fall in love with those who resemble the first beloved objects of our affection, to do it again because we loved it the first time. If Mom was truly wonderful, why shouldn't her son want to marry a girl like the girl who married dear old Dad? Surely all normal love, it needn't be kinky, it needn't be blatantly incestuous, is bound to partake in part of transference love. Repeating the good makes sense, but we have trouble understanding the compulsion to repeat what causes pain. And while Freud has tried to explain this compulsion as part of a dubious concept called the death instinct, it can also be understood as our hopeless effort to undo, rewrite the past. In other words, we do it, and we do it, and we do it, and do it again in the hope that this time the ending will be different. We keep repeating the past when we were helpless and acted upon, trying to master and change what has already happened. In repeating painful experience, we are refusing to lay to rest our childhood ghosts. We continue to clamor for something that cannot be. No matter how hard they clap for us now, she will never clap for us then. We have to relinquish that hope. We have to let go. For we cannot climb into a time machine, become that long-gone child, and get what we want when we oh so desperately wanted it. The days for that getting are over, finished, done. We have needs we can meet in different ways, in better ways, in ways that create new experience. But until we can mourn that past, until we can mourn and let go of that past, we are doomed to repeat it. That is a very profound and accurate assessment of our lives, the necessity of mourning the past, and that's what the book is all about. Necessary losses, to give up the past, to recognize we cannot relive the past, we cannot make up for lost time, we can't go back and have a perfect scene on the stage of life. It was as it was, we're on the stage today, we must move forward. This concludes another section of this lecture and gives us the perfect opportunity to take our dinner break, and for those arriving for the evening service to come in and start their decrees. Thank you very much for your kind attention.